Yes, sir. I'll start that right now. You are live, sir.
Thank you. Let's call the Public Works and Utilities Committee meeting for August 8th, 2022 to order. Can we have a roll call vote, please?
Yes, good evening, Public Works and Utilities Committee. My name is Javier Martinez. I'm filling in for Jamie Ray Diaz. I'll start off the roll call with Councilwoman Amanda Chavez,
Here.
Councilor Lee Garcia,
Here.
Councilor Michael Garcia,
Present.
Councilwoman Carol Romero Worth,
I'm here.
and Chair Chris Rivera.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. We'd also like to welcome Councilwoman Villarreal, who's decided to join us tonight, so welcome. Thank you, Mr. Martinez. Could we have, do we have any, or Ron, next to approval of the agenda, any changes from staff?
No changes, Mr. Chair.
Anything from the committee? Wishes of the committee?
Move to approve?
Second.
Motion for approval of the agenda in a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any abstentions? Any nays? Seeing none, motion carries. Next, we're on to approval of the consent agenda. Any changes from staff?
No changes, Mr. Chair.
Anything committee members would like to pull? Councilor Lee Garcia.
Item C, please.
C. He is in car. He is in car, okay. Anyone else?
Item A, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Romero Worth, item A. All right, what are the wishes of the committee?
To approve is amended. Second.
Motion for approval of the consent agenda is amended. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any abstentions? Any nays? Seeing none, motion carries. Next, we're on to approval of the minutes. Any changes from staff?
No changes, Mr. Chair.
Anything from the committee? Wishes of the committee?
Move to approve?
Second.
Motion for approval with a second of the minutes from July 25th. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any nays, any abstentions? Seeing none, motion carries. Thank you. We're on to presentation informational items. Item A is an update on Santa Fe Parks, Trails, and Watershed. Swan Park Phase 2 initial community engagement. I don't know if Ms. McDonald was going to be here or if you're going to be doing it, Director.
Thank you so much, Chairman, members of the committee. Actually, we have Scott Overly, our Parks Project Administrator, here to kick this off. And we also have a great partner of ours from NV5 who's been helping us project manage this under professional service agreement. Chris, and all of a sudden your last name just flew out of my brain. Yeah, Chris Longley Postuma, and he's done a great job with this. In fact, once we started the Swan Park, actually we just finished. Maybe you could tell what happened at Soccer Valley a little bit, just to introduce yourself when you get up to the podium.
Yeah, so at Swan Park, I engaged with Scott and Melissa to help install some new soccer field lighting out there for 2 of the fields, and also to do some improvements to the essentially the landscaping. There are a lot of drainage issues out there, both affecting the field and the related path and other areas around it. So we were able to remediate those issues and install the new field lighting, and we actually passed final inspection on all the electrical upgrades through PNM and through our contractor today.
Oh, congratulations, Chris. If I could, what I wanted to point out was that it was actually a Soccer Valley project. It was funded by the county, the city, and a legislative appropriation. You might remember it was on the books when I arrived 4 years ago. And the Soccer Valley people were a little bit frustrated in not believing we were ever going to deliver. And so Chris met with them every other week for the entire duration of the project just to make sure that they were included and had they could weigh in on any decisions and that they knew it was moving. And so it was really fantastic to bring that project all the way home, expend those matching funds from the county and the legislative appropriation. And so that was Chris's first project where he helped us, and now he'll be helping us with the Swan Park as well. So I just want to give you that little background.
And this was for MRC, correct?
That's correct, not Swan. That's MRC Soccer Valley, yeah. Okay, go ahead, Scott. Thank you.
Good evening, Chairman Rivera and members of the committee. We're here tonight to talk about the community engagement for Swan Park Phase 2. And basically what we were looking to do was to re-engage. It'd been a while since the community had, we talked with the community, and we wanted to see where they were at with the idea of new amenities for the Phase 2 part of the park. And so this was a collaborative work with NV5, and Chris did a lot of work on this to help make sure that we were engaging the community in the correct ways and as many community members as possible. So the initial community outreach goals, as I mentioned, we wanted to re-engage with the community since it had been a while, and we'd gone through the heavy COVID part of the 2021 years. And so we looked back to the master plan that had been developed and put together a list of different amenities that the master plan referred to, and were able to work with different communities, people within the community around the park, but also with schools and with some of the stakeholders and clubs that are nearby. We did have a meeting with, a virtual meeting at that point with as many people as we could get to take a look. And then we also put together a questionnaire that went out, and we had a lot of responses. And I touched base on this the last time that we met, and we had just about 300 responses to that questionnaire. Chris is going to get into a little bit more of the details of the questionnaire and of the engagement there. I'll let you go ahead and do that now.
So picking up on where Scott left off, the approach that we took in looking to really, again, re-engage the community, find some initial feedback from the community to help us move the project forward, we chose a two-pronged approach. One was starting with a public meeting, and that was to directly in person be able to re-engage with the community and sort of remind them of what the master plan included and get their direct feedback in a sort of direct in-person way, and prime them for then the second portion of this, which was the survey that Scott referred to, which went into a little more depth trying to understand what are the community's interests at the park currently, what do they hope the park could be in the future. So that was sort of the two-pronged approach that we took. For the public meeting, we presented a short presentation. All the materials were presented in both Spanish and English, and we worked with one of our community colleagues to provide Spanish interpretation live during that Zoom session. This was back a little bit during some of the COVID lockdowns, so we chose Zoom as a format for safety during that time period. About 53 people registered. We had about 30 in attendance. And the layout of that meeting was, again, to sort of re-engage, remind folks what's happened at the park to date, what is in the master plan for Swan Park, which details the 3 phases, and prime them for the survey. And then we had a pretty extensive Q&A and comment section as well, where people could take time to both put comments in the Q&A box that we would respond to, and also to speak directly to us and provide comments, ask questions. We did record that meeting. It's on the city's YouTube channel. If you would like to take a look at that. Following the meeting, we did put out a public survey. It was also conducted in Spanish and English. We ended up with just under 300 respondents, everybody from high schoolers to young family to older retirees. We asked a lot of questions, but focused on how the community currently uses the park and how they'd like to use the park in the future. And because we're using the master plan as a guide, we asked them to rank the Phase 2 and Phase 3 amenities in order of preference to see, 10 years on after the original master plan, what of those things do people want to see first? And then you can imagine we also got a lot of free-form commenting back, which was really helpful, an opportunity for people to say whatever they might want to say about Swan Park, which was invaluable feedback for us. So a quick recap on the master plan, Phase 2, Phase 3 amenities, and then we'll talk a little bit about the takeaways from the meeting and the survey. This is a list of the Phase 2, Phase 3 amenities. Included everything from plantings around the existing water tank down there, the irrigation water tank, horseshoe pits, BMX track, dog park, a more concrete hiker-biker trailhead and park overlook, community garden, tennis court, pickleball courts, water play element, sort of a general category there of water element, multi-purpose fields, which could include everything from soccer to rugby to a large festival lawn for events, things like that, and also a skate park. And we found through the survey the top 5 amenities were the hiker-biker trailhead, some sort of water play element, community gardens, dog park, and multi-sport fields, in particular soccer fields. We also, as I mentioned, had a lot of other free-form feedback. Some of the main takeaways from those comments were a high desire for permanent public restrooms with sinks and water bottle access, water fill stations, a high desire for more seating and more shaded areas in the park. It's pretty exposed out there right now. There was some concern around access to the arroyos, and in particular, dumping of garbage and ATVs that might be tearing up certain areas. And then also, there was a desire for a look at ongoing safety and maintenance at the park. So really thinking about the operational end of maintaining the park in addition to what elements we're adding to the park. And last but not least, a lot of the respondents we had were very engaged in the Phase 1 process, and you can imagine had some good learnings for us to take away from that process to try to make Phase 2 and Phase 3 better. So we have a lot of good feedback that we're working with to try to be more inclusive and more communicative and really increase the value of this process moving forward. So to sum things up, the next steps, again, this was really sort of an initial effort, gauge where the public is at, see how interests have changed in the last number of years. And what we're looking at now is taking the information that we have from the survey, from the meeting, and developing some procurement packets, one for, most likely for a roadway engineering firm to help expand the roadway into the park more so we actually have access to more of the park. And then a second design procurement packet for, say, a landscape or park design group to join us and help to develop the ideas that were presented in the master plan and prioritized by the stakeholders. And then from there, we can go in and, again, continue that design process and continue engaging. So again, this is really sort of initial engagement, and we know there's a lot more detailed work to do as design progresses. So I think we're looking at procurement packets. We've talked about trying to get those set up this fall and going out to some on-call design partners this fall. And then depending on what comes back from firms, we'll be able to develop more elaborate schedules for design phase, construction phase, and also leverage those documents, those design documents, to go out to get an understanding of cost and go after funding for construction.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from the committee? Councilor Lee Garcia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just thank you guys for your work on this. It's definitely a very good project for our Southside community. It's something that's very well needed, and looking for towards the future with our Phase 3 of Tierra Contenta. I guess my question would be more along the lines of how are we, and I know a lot of this is going to be dependent on funding, and I think we'll talk about that a little bit maybe on the item that I pulled, but how are we trying to align this with the construction? Because a lot of times the construction of housing and that Phase 3 is going to come pretty quick. And once they get going on housing, it'll be great to have this asset for the community to enjoy for future years to come. And so I guess that's Phase 2, Phase 3, and kind of aligning that with the future building of the area.
If I could, Chairman, thank you. Councilor Garcia. As you know, we have it in our top 5 legislative priority requests. We had it last year in our top 5, and it did achieve, I think, about $325,000 of funding in the last legislative session. So as soon as we are able to receive those appropriations, that will pay for the design, or most of it probably. And then what we're seeking by having it in the top 5 this year is additional funding that would go towards construction. So design would take around a year, and then we'd be ready to go for construction. I think that's timed pretty well with Tierra Contenta Phase 3, actually, because they're beginning design of the Paseo del Sol extension spine infrastructure that the governing body just approved that contract with Tierra Contenta to complete that project, which was funded by an $800,000 DOT grant. So we keep these projects at the top of our priority list as set by the governing body and pursue all the grant opportunities. We do also expect to have a GRT bond later this year. I think this would be a really strong candidate for some funds there. So as soon as the audits are complete, we'll be able to do a GRT bond. So we'll be looking for all the opportunities to fund it, but I think it is right now lined up pretty well with Tierra Contenta Phase 3 development.
Thank you. That's all I have. Thank you for your guys' work.
Any other questions? I had a couple. So thank you for all the work you've been doing on this, and thank you for engaging the community. With regards to the water feature, whatever it is, that's always been an issue of contention with water, the water situation that we have, the drought. But overwhelmingly, I think water is something, a water feature for the kids is something that I hear almost constantly. Am I true in that feeling with regards to the survey?
Yes, you are. That was definitely one of the top 5 elements that people were looking for. Wasn't specific as to what that might be. There were ideas from pools all the way to some sort of a water play area. We're already looking at communities in real hot areas like Phoenix and that utilize some of these play elements. So there is possibility of being able to do something that would work very well within our community and the standards that we've set for trying to save as much water as possible. And as new technologies come along, I think that we're really going to be able to put these things together and potentially come up with something. And that's kind of where we're looking at now, is getting into that design phase so that we can actually start figuring that out. How do we make this thing work, for the kids and the families that really want that? So
I'd like to add to that.
yeah, my thing is it's a possibility, but we also have to look at how does that fit within all of our standards and where we want to go with the water. So I want to be very careful about that, obviously.
Thank you, Scott. And I would add to that as well. One of the big things to think about with any water feature is maintenance. So operation and maintenance is really expensive. As we know, we just went through this with BC Pool. It probably wasn't getting enough attention over the years. It had been leaking a lot of water. So we really need to, as we really make these investments, is think about what the operating maintenance cost is. That's a whole nother level of a type of a feature from a normal park, right, with a swing and maybe some grass. The other thing I'd like to add is that the Parks Division, Melissa is, our director, is looking at converting one of her positions to be a water sort of conservation person that actually really looks at converting all of our controllers and our irrigation systems and really monitoring and managing our water much better. So we might be able to squeeze some efficiency out of the system that would be enough to sort of serve the park. So we'll definitely be, I think, that two-pronged approach, right? So you can serve it in other places where you might be using more than you need, and then that gives you some to work with to create a feature like that.
Okay, thank you. And then the other question was, there were some things put into the park later that weren't part of the master plan, like the exercise portion that went into current Swan Park, and then the Frisbee golf that went in. How are those memorialized into the kind of master plan of Swan Park?
I think that those were elements that had come about through a lot of volunteer groups that were looking to help us and present these elements that could go into the park and the larger part of it, especially like with the Frisbee golf, the disc golf. That utilizes an area that really would not be utilized for anything else. And it, through an enormous amount of volunteer hours, they've been able to make that work. As I understand, the exercise court, that was a coordination with arts and culture. And so it was a marriage of both an artistic endeavor and then also the exercise element. And there were some monies that were involved in that, I think, that allowed us to utilize a park and a space in the park for something that the community could use. It wasn't necessarily part of that original idea overall, but definitely fits into the flavor of the master plan. If that makes sense. I mean, it's an exercise court.
Yeah, no, I think they're great. Do they need to be memorialized somehow into the master plan of the park? I imagine as we go through, things will be removed from the master plan. Initially, there was an orchard in there, and when you talk about water, I'm not sure that really fits into really what we want to see with phase 2 or 3 of Swan Park. So,
Yeah, I could see that happening. If these become part of that overall master plan.
okay. I think I'll work with Director Wheeler with that. Any other questions? Councilor Garcia?
Chair, tennis courts. Was that brought up in any of the engagement? That I know there's plenty of tennis courts coming today, but
That was one of the top five.
one of the top 5 I didn't see. Oh, okay, I see it up there. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
It wasn't in your top 5, but I do see it up there. And
Yeah, so it is listed as one of the phase 2 and phase 3 amenities in the master plan,
right.
but it didn't rise to the top 5 when we asked the survey respondents to rank those 10 in order of priority.
Right.
So it's still in the master plan as an amenity to do in the future, but currently with the feedback we have, it was not.
Okay.
It didn't rank higher than number 5.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you. No other questions? All right, thank you both for the presentation. What was your last name again, Chris?
So it's hyphenated, Longley Postema.
Postema?
Postema. As hard as you guys play.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And thank you, Scott, for your work on this and, well, continued work on this. So
You're very welcome.
appreciate it. Thank you, Director Wheeler. Our next presentation is a demonstration of capital project reporting application and ArcGIS now available to the public.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll just make a quick introduction. This is one of our newest members in the Public Works Department. This is Lee Gagnon. He's an engineer in training, EIT. It's known as you're working towards your professional engineer license. That's your test, and then you have a period of developing professional skills. We're really happy to have him in our new Complete Streets Division, working for Ramela Glorioso Moss, who's now the Capital Projects Manager. And Lee is a whiz with technology, so he's helping us with this new ArcGIS application. The purpose of this application is really to be transparent with our community about all of the really great capital projects that we have going on, about all the funds that the governing body has allocated to these projects and to their priorities and to enhancing our community. So it has been recently made available to the public on our GIS webpage, the city's webpage. So we wanted to introduce you all to it and get any feedback and answer any questions. Thank you so much, and you can take it away, Lee.
Thank you, Regina, for that introduction. Chair Rivera, members of the board, or members of the committee. As Regina mentioned, we're going to be reviewing the reporting application that we've developed within ArcGIS Online that is now available to the public. I've just loaded up our webpage here just so you can see. We're currently working in the process of getting a splash page here for the public dashboard. We also have some internal dashboards. This is a multifaceted dashboard. There's an internal contributor piece for the project managers to add the projects. Then their supervisors approve those projects and let us know what pass, fail, if there needs to be edits, if we need to remove the project, so on and so forth. And things that are internal only, that only we can see. But then lastly, the ultimate place that these land is on the public dashboard. These are the past projects that have been reviewed for accuracy. And so we don't have a splash page here, but I've already gone through the internal workings to pull up the public dashboard. I will get that up later this week. So let me close this for a moment here. So here's the landing page for when someone from the public accesses this web page. You can see on the left side, it's categories broken down by division. Airport, arts and culture, economic development, so on and so forth. You can click these. These are live filters that will filter out all the projects that you see within our city limits here. I'll stick with streets since that's what I know best. And you can see that it filtered out. So of those 31 that we have passed, 13 are streets projects. You can see on the right a list of the projects. And then, of course, these are all going to say streets category, but you can see that some are in the design, some are in planning. Don't believe we have any that show, oh, we do. Construction, that's right, Camino Entrada, which is currently under construction. And so you can click on any one of these projects, and it's going to zoom right to that project and pull up a pop-up window that gives you information on what the city goal that we're trying to accomplish, the description and the project scope, construction dates, as well as when they're estimated to be operational, how much funding we have, whether it be partial, full, or no funding at this time, just estimated funding. This one isn't an example. We don't quite have this one up yet, but we will have a project summary link. So for each project, we can go to the web page and get more information on this specific project. I'll show an example of that in a moment, as well as pictures of the project. Whether it be overview, whatever is pertinent, whatever the project manager feels helps to capture this project. You can click on these. It'll open it up in a separate tab, and you can see these pictures full screen. But before we dive too much into that, I do just kind of want to stick to the splash screen for a moment. Press home, zoom out. We'll unselect this project so we can see all the projects again. At the bottom, you can see some of these dynamic tables and charts that we have. So right now, I still have streets selected. The streets projects make up $71.2 million of our total cost within our capital projects. If I unclick streets, you'd see that number grows and it's dynamic. And so $111 million here on the total cost. And right next to that, if we full screen this graph, you can see a project category table showing bars for each of our divisions and how much funding is allocated to each of these departments. So parks, streets, or each of these divisions, excuse me, stormwater, facilities, IT, the airport, community services. This relies on that information being populated as more projects continue to be populated as we are still adding these projects. This table will grow, and it'll stretch and conform, so on and so forth. Excuse me, I apologize for that. But you can also filter it if you were just wanting to look at street, stormwater, and seniors. You could look at this, and it's all dynamic, all interactable. So, I'm going to go to a project that we have a lot of information populated on. This project's moved quite a long ways, and that is our Guadalupe Street Reconstruction project in streets. And so on this project, we have a lot of information populated here, and here's one that actually has a project summary link that's populated that we can navigate to. This is not clickable, and I'm currently investigating that right now, but you can just still highlight it and paste it into another tab. And that'll bring you here to our city website where we have a project set up, a project page set up for each of our projects, or at least we're working on that. We have put that on pause while we migrate to a new city website. I'm working with city staff on that. Here you can find things as far from the study, from our road safety audit reports, public meetings, any of the alternatives and all the other reports and studies that were generated for this project. It will vary per project and per phase. Public meeting transportation, any handouts we've done, minutes from meetings, so on and so forth. And you can see that we do have a list of these projects that we have started to populate. But again, we're trying to make the migration on the city website kosher, so we're working with staff on that, on the timing of this. More to come on this. The other feature I had shown you earlier is that for each project, there's pictures that the project manager can upload. So if you click one of these, it'll pull up a full screen of the project in hand. So again, this is the Guadalupe project, both the bridge and the road reconstruction. So these are just a couple pictures that were uploaded for this project. There's possibilities as well for other items. So we have on here showing you all of the projects throughout all the different divisions and all the different categories here. There's also a way that you can filter by which projects are fundraising, which projects are in the planning phase, which projects are in the construction phase, which projects are in the design phase, which projects are even complete. Didn't know we had one. That's cool. So, if there's more information that you would need, or if there's a certain type of project that isn't represented, we've been investigating this single project here. It kind of makes the map a little noisy. There's a couple projects that take this up. But we've been investigating a way of, instead of having that project shown up here, we could show it up with a layer. And that's actually what this layer is, hotspots. It's covered so you can't see it as well. I zoom in just some so you can see that a little bit better. See, then we would have this point, something a little less noisy, but would still kind of tell you what you're looking at. But we need to look at that on a case-by-case basis to see if that information needs to be available or not. Some of the other capabilities of this, because this is ArcGIS Online, is that we are able to come into these layers and we could show certain other things. Like here is our 2021 planned road rehabilitation. Not necessarily a project, but maybe it's something that the public would be concerned with, of knowing that, okay, we were on these streets in 2021. So we do have a lot of capabilities here because this is an Esri application that we have a lot of capabilities with our enterprise licensing. So there's quite a few layers in here. We won't go over all of those, of course. And then lastly, if you want to change the base map too. So if you wanted to see more satellite images, something that's somewhat of a combination between this base map and satellite, major streets, so on and so forth. There's a lot of customization that you can do here that the public does have access to. And because this is read-only, none of the data here can be impacted by what the public clicks and clicks on. This view here is read-only and doesn't have access to our database from a cybersecurity standpoint. I believe that concludes my overview of the website. Are there any questions on this demonstration?
We have questions for Mr. Gagnon? Gagnon? Any questions? You said it's already live? It's already
This is live,
on
yes.
the website?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Great information, I think, for the public to be able to, I get a lot of questions all the time from projects on the south side about the airport, and to be able to direct them to this page now instead of trying to figure it out over a week would be awesome. So appreciate it. Glad it's being done. And the maintenance of it, once I don't know if you're going to stay or if you're going to leave. He's in an internship, you said? No?
Lee is a new staff member, full-time staff
Oh.
member in one of our engineer positions.
Great.
I know, he will help us maintain it. He even just found some bugs while we were presenting it that I saw happening over there. We also have our whole GIS team that's briefed in. They worked with us as we developed this application, so this is right up their alley. And then the other maintenance that has to happen is the project managers need to keep their project information. And so Sam said to me the other day, well, we're going to be sending you some project reports. And I'm like, no, just go into the application and make sure that's up to date with how much money you have, what your construction completion date is, and those kinds of things. So they'll be going in about quarterly to update the projects.
You went through it pretty quick, but removal of projects, once they're complete, the project managers will do that themselves, or will it be someone else?
So that would actually ultimately fall on me. There is a complete category in here, and I'm not sure how long we would want to keep projects in here, maybe within a certain amount of time. I think that requires some internal discussion on how long we'll keep projects up. But ultimately, that'll come down to Leonard Padilla or I to go in and manually remove these projects. That way project managers aren't, we want to limit the amount of access, of total access that we give to everyone, just to maintain stability of the database.
I appreciate this. I look forward to messing around with it later.
Awesome.
Seeing if I can break it.
And my email is in the agenda. If you want me to send you a link, it is a little bit buried at this point on the GIS website, but I will be adding a hyperlink on the Public Works Department as well, as leaving it here, just a shortcut to this landing page, as well as adding the public dashboard to this landing page, because it's not currently there yet.
Any questions? Councilman Video?
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to, if you could repeat how to access it. I know you just said that it's hard to go the roundabout, so how would one access it right now?
Absolutely.
And it's a great resource, by the way. I really appreciate that we have this tool.
I only had it pulled up because I wasn't certain if we would have internet in here. So if you come here to the main Santa Fe NM.gov, and you go to Information Technology and Telecommunications, under the department's selection drop-down. On the left side here, you will see GIS services and products. You'll go ahead and click there. And then underneath that drop-down, Capital Projects Dashboards. And then here is where I need to add the public dashboard access. Currently, there's just the city staff use only landing page, and this requires having an ArcGIS Online login and username and password. The public's not going to have that. Anyone who's not a project manager is not going to have that offhand. So this is where I need to add the public dashboard button that is not here yet, but that will be there later this week.
If I could add to that, how I always get here is I just Google City of Santa Fe GIS, and it gives you a link, boom, and then you're right on the GIS page, and then you're seeing that left column there. And then you click on Capital Projects Dashboard. Yeah, it'd be great if we could get, I thought we'd asked for that
We did.
a bunch of times.
I'll just do it.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you so much. I might add a little bit to this. So I first launched into this application really for the purpose of capturing our master capital plan, all the things that we want to get funded and want to get done. And as the application evolved, we became clear that this is a reporting tool, not a planning tool, really, and it's great for this, for people to see stuff that's funded and in progress, maybe not fully funded, but at least partially funded and in progress. How's the progress coming? Where is it located? Is it in my district? All those kinds of things. And so we're actually going to have to develop a separate application, and there are some really nice ones to get our master capital plan in there so that when you say things like, you know, is playground equipment at a particular park on the list, that will be also transparently available to governing bodies. So that'll be our next project that I'll work on.
Great. Thank you. Councilor Garcia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Lee, is it Gagnon or is it Gagnon?
Gagnon.
Okay, that's right, then I just wanted to pronounce it right, Mr. Gagnon. So I directed myself to the website, clicked on the links, and as you mentioned, it asks me to sign in. As a city councilor, do we get access to sign into this? I know it's asking me for a username and password, which I have no idea what that would be for me. I've never been issued such credentials. So if we have access to this, if it would be possible to share the governing body's username and credentials, or login credentials with us so we can access this. As
Yes.
Councilor Rivera said, try to break it, so to speak.
Yes. Oh, yes. Councilor Garcia, the landing page as it is here, the only reason you would need a login is if you were actually editing the database, going into our contributor app and adding projects, and so on and so forth. When we add the public dashboard here, you will not be prompted for a login. You will just get directed right to the public page as I pulled it up here.
Okay, but so for time being, we don't have access to it only, okay.
I think only those who need to add to the database will be getting logins.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
I'm so sorry, we did ask for the public landing splash page to be here weeks ago, and it should have been here, but we'll get it up this week so that it won't ask you for that, and the public can access as well.
Do you anticipate by the end of the week?
Absolutely. I have the credentials now to be able to do this myself, so I'll just handle this one.
If something happens for some reason, will you just let us all know?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Mr. Gagnon.
Councilor Lee Garcia.
Sorry. My questions were similar to Councilman Villarreal's question. I did the same thing. I Googled the City of Santa Fe GIS, and I got there. And so I'm glad to see that you will be adding something that's a little easier for people to get to, because sometimes navigating the website and trying to point them as to where to go and how to use things, it's difficult for us at times, I can see, for the general population. So that's about it. I just had that same comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilwoman Chavez?
Is there any way that you can just email us the link? That would be better, so that it's just in our email and we could copy and paste and email it as it's requested, so we don't have to give the directions in navigating the website, because it's just going to be such an informative tool. Thank you so much.
I'll absolutely do that. I'll also add some meta keywords to the website, so that way you could search capital project plan, City of Santa Fe, and it should come to this website instead of having to even navigate through GIS. So I'll investigate that later this week.
Great, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Any other? No further? Okay. Thank you, and welcome to the city. We're on to our action items. Item A, an ordinance amending SFCC 1987, Section 23-5.1 to add definitions to cultural event and small commercial event, and amending SFCC 1987, Section 23-5.2 to allow up to 8 small commercial permits for cultural events on the plaza, including Juneteenth, Indigenous Peoples Day, and 6 additional events selected by lottery. This is being sponsored by Councilwoman Villarreal and myself, and Councilwoman Romero-Worth pulled it from consent.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know you all looked at this in quality of life, so I don't want to take a whole lot of time here, but just wondered, since we have both sponsors here, if you could just speak to, I believe it's now been cut down to 5 small commercial events by lottery. If you could just speak to the thinking there. Completely support adding Juneteenth and Indigenous Peoples Day, and I believe Pride has also been added by the amendment, so I'm supportive of that, but wanted to hear a little bit more about the lottery situation and get the accurate number that's reflected in the bill as a result of the amendment at quality of life.
Councilwoman Villarreal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Councilor Romero-Worth. I know some of my colleagues heard this before, but I am going to just touch on kind of where we are today, how we got here, and the fact that there's a substitute bill before us that was reintroduced mostly from stakeholder and staff feedback over the last few months. We initially had started with 10 small commercial event permits, and as we made our way through just discussions about it with community groups, I think it was wanting to be cognizant that starting off relatively small makes sense. Initially, we didn't name some of the groups. I think it was primarily to try to figure out what's the best method to make sure the groups that have continuously asked for their cultural events to be able to allow for vendors. And then there is this need, I guess, from what I've talked to stakeholders and groups that have been wanting to have an opportunity to be considered for their one-day cultural event to be able to be selected in the lottery. And that came about because some of these groups, they don't necessarily, they've had consistent events, but they don't necessarily, I think the way it wanted to work is they wanted to have that option knowing that that was a secondary use. This is not guaranteed for the 5 lottery slots. It was really just to allow for people to have an opportunity to enhance their event with a commerce aspect for their event. And one thing I did want to mention is that the 5 remaining permits for those one-day cultural events are, if you participate in the lottery, the nonprofit organization must have organized and held the same city-permitted event in at least 2 of the prior 5 years and may only submit 1 entry in the lottery per year. That was really just coming from feedback about making sure that existing cultural events have a track record. It came from meetings. They were indicating they don't want new events to just start to pop up and say, oh, I want to have vendors at my event. This was really events that have had permitted with us and have worked with the city before and want to be able to incorporate and enhance their event with vendors as a secondary use. I do want to mention with the amendment, we didn't initially have Pride in the mix because they were considering and exploring other routes. And we had talked with the director of Pride to kind of understand what they were thinking and envisioning. And after meeting with them, we did decide that we would add them back in as an eligible small commercial event permittee. The other thing I want to add is based on feedback, again, from plaza artisans and push cart vendors, they wanted to make sure that when there's an event and they have vendors, that they're not being charged additional fees to sell during the small commercial event, permitted event. So that's another part of the amendment that got approved at Quality of Life. Again, I guess I just want to make sure that folks understand that there are definite limitations with the small commercial event permits and the folks that hold those. They're limited to using only the plaza park and not the streets. Streets cannot be shut down to place vendors on them. And of course, the spaces reserved for our plaza artists and artisans and pushcart vendors will remain in place during the small events. And there's other regulations, you know, they have to be permitted in the same way that the major commercial events are, and they are one-day permitted events. That means they have to set up and tear down the day of the event. And then just want to add that the small commercial events, the vendors themselves have to have licenses, which requires them to have a business license and also file and pay applicable gross receipts tax on their sales. So I'll stop there. I'm sure there's other questions in like more specifics, so I'll yield the floor.
Councilwoman Romero-Worth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Like I said, I do support adding the Juneteenth, adding Indigenous Peoples Day, adding Pride, now that they've decided they would like to be a named event. I am less sure about these small kind of by lottery events. I guess my philosophy would be that we start slow and like just let's absorb this next round and then kind of see how that feels and be more incremental in approaching how we use the plaza. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Councilor Mike. Councilor Chavez.
Thank you, Chair. And Councilwoman Villarreal, you and I have had conversations about kind of my concerns along the same lines of Councilor Romero-Worth in regards to this thing about starting slow. If we have well-attended and well-established events that are already occurring, why not use those as a way of collecting data on some of the concerns that the community has brought up of like impact and workload on city staff. We already know they're well attended. We already know that there'll be a good test of kind of the capacity it's going to require in a lot of different areas. So my question is, though, what is the thought process? What's the thought process of expanding? And you've kind of explained it to me, but what's the thought process of expanding beyond those three prior to giving those three a chance to really see what, what it entails?
Thank you, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councilor. I think the reason why we wanted to have flexibility is there are groups that have existed and have a track record that had inquired about having vendors, but they weren't as probably persistent as the other groups. And there's just some that I've talked to that have had events with us that were asking about vendors and what that could look like, and some just for an example. And these are small events, but like Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women have asked about that. Hip Hop University has asked about that. Wellness Festival. And so these are smaller events that have actually had consistent events on the plaza and may or may not always want to have vendors at their event. So I guess I wanted to give folks an opportunity to have a chance to consider it, to be able to try something different than that they've had been able to do in the past. And as I had said before, right now groups can't even sell T-shirts or memorabilia, and that's frustrating to them because they feel like they should be able to have that opportunity for a small event. So I don't think it's this large number out there that everybody's vying for a spot to have vendors. The one thing I did want to say about the lottery is that, we were talking with staff about how that process would look and what would happen at the beginning of the year, and who would be possibly missed. I think you remember we talked about this, quality of life. We did just a quick snapshot of how many groups actually have events at the beginning of the year. And there's mostly city events, which they wouldn't qualify. There's probably just one event in March that could potentially qualify for a small commercial event permit that has actually had a track record, has had annual events on the plaza, but they would still end up being able to fold in because their event is in March. So that just like quick snapshot helped us to confirm that there's not going to be all these groups trying to have events in the winter, that it would give staff enough time to do the lottery selection at the beginning of the calendar year in January, and that it wouldn't create, at least from Melissa's point of view, unfortunately she's sick and she couldn't be here, but that it wouldn't be burdensome for staff to be able to make that happen and give groups a chance to be able to be considered for the small commercial event permits.
Thank you. And just a follow-up to, did we get clarification on the lottery selection? I know that when it was described to us, it sounded a lot like first come, first serve, and that was it basically just sounded like an application process, and whoever got their application in first would be selected if they met the requirements. So are we still calling it a lottery selection?
We're still using a lottery system. I think it was unclear with Melissa. We talked about it this weekend, and I don't know if Regina wanted to have any, contribute to any of that conversation. Essentially, it is people would have to submit saying they're interested, and then it would be selected through either a system on IT that could set, an actual lottery pick, or that someone actually physically picks. So I don't know if you want to share anything about that, Regina, if there's anything else.
Thank you, Councilor Villarreal. Yeah, I think that is what we talked about, is pulling it out of the hat. The other thing I wanted to add is that Melissa was suggesting that we might move the lottery just back a little tiny bit, like maybe September, October, November, or something like that, just to give those early in the year ones. Because if you draw in October for the following year, that kind of gives people plenty of time to plan, so it might be something to consider.
Yeah, I think she and I talked about it yesterday, and she said potentially November would be something that we would, but we wouldn't necessarily have to put it in the language that we could say, or we could amend it to say November of the year prior, but I think it was I was leaving it up to staff because procedurally, that's not going to go in the ordinance, those details. And I wanted to leave it up to really Barbara and Melissa to think what's best for them. They talked about the third week in November, is what she wrote to me. But then there was also like, well, January works too because it's slower. So I will leave that up to staff.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I'm just going to leave the last comment of I think the lottery itself makes it a little bit more complicated. And to complicate something that is a little foreign to us with the specific offense we've already outlined makes me a little nervous. So I just wanted to make that final comment, but I do appreciate your work on this, Councilwoman Villarreal, and I yield the floor. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Chavez. Councilor Michael Garcia?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess my clarification question was around the lottery, and Councilwoman Villarreal did clarify that it will actually be a lottery process, not a first-come, first-served. I think there's plenty of, whether we develop it internally or external applications available to host an actual lottery selection system. So I'm in full support of having a lottery system opportunity because it allows for the flexibility of organizations to participate in this process. It wouldn't require an organization to jump through the hurdles and hoops of going through legislation such as we're going through right now, which is complicated, and it can be a million times more complicated for smaller community-based organizations. And if we can leave that space where these organizations that don't have that internal capacity or legal wherewithal to get through sometimes the maze that is city government, let's leave the door open for folks. Creates that flexibility, and it creates that opportunity for organizations to say, oh, look, the plaza can be used by us. We can do X, Y, and Z there. All it takes is for us to do an event and have that track record to show that we are actually a legit event and we've got community support. So I think it doesn't have to be hard. And I think the confusion around the lottery process that I think it took place, I can't remember which committee meeting I was watching, where there was that kind of questioning, that it looks like it's been resolved, that we would be using an actual selection system, not a first come, first served. There's got to be an application process to get the information, to populate the information that goes into the selection process, but this isn't rocket science by any means. This is easy. We can get this done, and I think this is an opportunity to show community-based organizations that the plaza is available to use for everybody. That's all I got, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilor. Any other questions? I just want to make a comment. I was okay with going from 6 additional events by lottery to 5 because we mainly, Councilman Villarreal, has, I think, in my opinion, bent over backwards to get Pride into this event, which doesn't really meets more the definition of a large commercial event than fitting into this ordinance. And because she's worked so hard on getting Pride into it, I was okay with backing down to the 5 events. But Pride shuts down streets. Their event is large. But she convinced me that having Pride in here, at least to start off, was a good thing. So she's done a good job in acquiescing to what Pride needed and what Pride wanted. And because of that, I think the 5, going from 6 to 5 lottery events, I think is a good compromise. So I'm continuing to support this bill and hope that it moves forward as approved by Quality of Life. Thank you. Any other comments or questions? All right, Council, do we have a motion for approval with a second? Any further discussion? And all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Oh, one opposition, Councilor Romero Worth. Any abstentions? All right, motion carries. Thank you. We're on item C, resolution adopting the 2024 through 2028 infrastructure capital improvements plan. Councilor Lee Garcia, you pull this.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just, yes, do we have to make a motion to approve or a motion on this for discussion?
Yeah.
So move to approve.
Second.
Just, again, being first year on this board and asking how these, a lot of these projects, how they get prioritized, and going through the list of projects, there's quite a few. You know, I think there's so many areas around the whole city that need attention, but how do we prioritize some of these projects? Obviously some cost a lot more than others. I know even just in our district, I was listening in on finance committee, and there was some question about 3 projects in our district out in the south end. And looking at how those projects are prioritized based on funding, or, again, I guess this is my question.
Thank you so much, Chairman. Councilor Lee Garcia. I keep personally a master capital plan for the city. That's based on input from councilors, the public, staff, things that are broken, need to be done. I've been here 4 years and have been compiling that since then. As funding opportunities arise, we look at the master capital plan and we choose projects that are quite suitable for that particular funding. So whether it was the GRT bond in 2018, or whether it was some of the immediate capital appropriations that we had, did 2 waves of last year with excess GRT beyond budget, whether it's a DOT funding that's coming available, whether it's FAA funding that's coming available. So we have this big list of all the capital needs that we have out there, and as funding becomes available, we pull over the items that are really good projects that would be eligible for that type of funding. For the legislative list, it's more community type of things to some extent. They want to see larger impact in our neighborhood, so less about, certainly a culvert in particular, or, smaller, more focused projects like that, although you will see some of those on there. The only order that matters on the ICIP is the top 5. The rest are all equally prioritized after that. So the legislature only sees the top 5 as a special set of priorities, and all the rest are equally listed. Some of the projects that you'll see on there we're sort of not even asking for legislative appropriation for, because DOT funding requires that it's on our ICIP list. Some of the utility funding, the Water Utility Board requires that it's on the ICIP list. So some of them are on that list really just as a way to be eligible for other funding that they're actually going to ultimately apply for. Basically we've been doing this now for 4 years, and we've gotten some feedback from our lobbyists about some consistency in our top 5, and that's one of the things that we try to achieve, is just keep showing a focus on our priorities. And what you'll see happen to the top 5 because of that is that the city will give some money to it, the legislature will give some money to it, then the legislature will give some more, and then we partner to actually get these projects done. One more thing that I'll add is that any project that receives any funding becomes the top of the list. Because if you don't move a project up so that it can get fully funded and done, then you have money that's sitting there that's unused, and you can lose it, and that's something that any of us have an appetite for, really, is getting grant money and not using it, which is sort of why I wanted to highlight that Soccer Valley project that Chris Longley Postema did for us, because it was out there for quite a while. And in fact, the legislative appropriation expired June 30th, 2022, and we got it done before then. You only have 3 or 4 years for a legislative appropriation to get that spent. So that comes right to the top of the list. We try to keep adding money to it to get it fully funded, like you saw Harrison Road when he was doing the demonstration of the capital project. That started as like a $300,000 project. 3 years ago, the legislature gave us $100,000. We put in a couple $100,000. Now it's an $800,000 project, but it's fully funded, and it's moving forward. So that's kind of a long answer to your question, but it is sort of long and complicated process.
Thank you for that information, and again, just kind of understanding how the prioritization of all these because there's so many great projects here, and I think that when you do look at that funding and some that are funded and some that aren't, and prioritizing and, you know, use it or lose it, I guess.
You know, if I could, Chairman and Councilor Garcia, one thing I'd like to add as well is that DOT is our biggest funding of any of our capital funding sources. In fact, there is in your packet today that passed on consent a $10.2 million grant that we just received for Guadalupe. That's the biggest grant I've seen to date. But this Infrastructure Jobs Act money and the Inflation Reduction Act money is coming through the agencies. So besides the state's money from, you know, oil and gas, they also get this extra federal money, which makes that a big granting source. So that would make me unlikely to recommend to the governing body that you put a road in the top 5, because we have this other fantastic funding source for road projects and bridge projects and trail projects and underpass projects. And they're all listed on there because that keeps them eligible, but we probably wouldn't necessarily want to put it in our top 5. Whereas things like the airport terminal phase 2, FAA is likely to have some money for that. I think we'd be likely to get funded for the design, which will be $2 million. But I think we will be looking again for legislative funds and other city funds and a big matching pot to make that phase 2 come to fruition. So it's not just thinking about what's most appropriate for this funding, but also what other funding sources are available for a particular project.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess it's just looking at projects that are what gives the biggest and best return on investment and impact to our communities, quality of life, and so on and so forth. So that's all I really had. Thank you for answering my questions.
Thank you. In addition to that, Councilor Garcia, nonprofits that want to use the city as the fiscal agent, the pass-through for the money, need to be on this list. And they could lobby, they could be last on the list and do some great lobbying and receive a lot of money, and they'll use the city as the fiscal agent for that. The other thing is, in the past, there have been special projects that were far down on our list, but that the legislature embraced or had additional funding for, or maybe a couple of them embraced and decided to do, you know, some smaller projects. And even though they weren't in our top 5, they did get approved for work to be done, and actually was complete within a pretty timely manner. So those things do happen. Councilor Romero-Worth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'd also just add that those nonprofits who seek money from the legislature have to have their nonprofit located on land owned by government. So it has to be owned by the state, has to be owned by the county, has to be owned by the city, can't be private land. We can't use public dollars to improve private land. There are many examples of nonprofits who are headquartered or operate on government land. So just wanted to give you that nuance too. Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification, Councilor Rivera-Worth, because there has been some confusion. In fact, we do have a legislative appropriation we do have to turn back because it was given to a nonprofit agency that isn't on city or county land, and we aren't able to get that money to them. What you're really looking for is that a nonprofit that can be exempted from anti-donation. So it could, if it's an indigent, if it serves just the indigent, if it's economic development, or if it's on our land, then they can be agents for us through that funds.
Yeah, and just to add to that, so for instance is the Santa Fe Children's Museum, which is located on state land. They get appropriations from the legislature for various things. That whole complex over there sits on state land, and all of those nonprofits are eligible and have received.
And the ones that are on our list include the Santa Fe Business Incubator, because that's our land, La Familia, because that's our building, Museo Cultural is another one that you'll see regularly, Kitchen Angels qualifies, so you'll see some of them on the list, and that's actually probably a pretty comprehensive list of the ones that are actually eligible.
Councilor Romero-Worth, anything else? Anything from the rest of the committee? I do want to let the committee know, I know it sounds like people were listening to Finance Committee, but Councilwoman Cassett and myself met with some folks from the Adult Soccer League, and there has been an offer of a $3 million match with the city if we could spend the money within 3 years. So that's a pretty short time frame, but we could leverage $3 million for $6 million of work. The master plan's already done, so this would be just following the master plan and really getting quite a bit more bang for the buck if we could actually do it. So keep that in mind. I'm sure we'll have some discussion on this come Wednesday night. Is this on for Wednesday night?
Chairman, yes, it is, and I think what we would need is an amendment, actually, so that we can change the list, so that'd be great to have that amendment for that. And just to add for everybody's understanding, we do have enough money to go into design of Swan Park Phase 2, so that project will keep on moving, and they have somewhere in the vicinity of a year of work that's funded right now. And so I believe that leveraging that Soccer Valley donation and putting that in the top 5 makes a lot of sense, because then we'll get some funds for that and get that one moving.
Thank you for that.
What gets moved out of the top 5, given we haven't had that discussion, and usually when we change things, it goes through a whole committee process, and to have, it's swapped at the end, I think it causes some pause. 100% in favor of this. I think was in discussions with the committee or the group bringing this before it even came on our list. So my question is, given that if it's on the list, we can still ask for the resources, or the organization go ask on their behalf, which it seems like they've got very strong support, which led to the prior allocation for the lights. And given the information that Mr. Duran said, it's not good to swap things around. What's the amendment for? It's, to me, I'm just...
So I think that would be up to probably myself and Councilor Cassett to come up with an amendment to see what would be taken out of the top 5 and replaced with MRC, and that's going to be, probably the bulk of our discussion on Wednesday night.
Okay.
But we'll have to put something forward, and I haven't spoken to her at length, so we'll have to figure out what makes the most sense. And talking to Director Wheeler as well, as to where it's going to fit and how it's going to fit, and where some of the other funding sources might come for the other project, or whatever project we decide to take out.
Okay, thank you, Chair, for the clarification.
Chairman, if I could, this does need to be to DFA by August 18th, so this governing body really we need to finalize the resolution, so.
All right, no further discussion. What are the wishes of the committee with regards to, I'm sorry, you're right. We do have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. 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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Seeing none, motion carries. Thank you. Yeah. Next, item 8, no action items for discussion. Item 9, matters from staff. Director Wheeler.
No matters from staff, Chairman.
Director Jones.
No matters from utilities. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Matters from the committee. Director Wheeler, do you happen to know if we have a lobbyist yet?
Chairman, I do not know. Sorry.
No, that's okay. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, all right. Matters from the chair, I have nothing except our next meeting is Monday, August 29th. Thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you, Mr. Martinez, for filling in. Appreciate it.
Thank you.